Hello, everyone, and welcome to another segment of our series, Vines Unknown, where we explore areas around the world that are not so familiar and we discover them together here on our segment. In this segment, we're exploring Armenia, an area that has been interest of myself and others dear to my heart because I grew up with quite a bit of Armenians, even though I'm Greek. And before I do continue, let me also introduce myself. As Ari has said, I'm going to be your host this evening. I'm Fotis Stamos, and along with me, my co-host Ari Kalos.
Hello.
Right, and we have a very special guest with us, who's going to basically give us everything we need to know about Armenia's wine culture. We're going to taste wines together as a group. Let me introduce our guest. We have with us from Storica Wines, Mr. Ara Sarkissian, and please forgive me if I cannot pronounce it correctly.
You did better than I expected.
Excellent.
Good.
So, Ara, welcome to the
Great to
segment.
be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. I know you got your hands full. You just finished a webinar right before this, and you're jumping into it with us here. So, thank you so much for doing so.
Happy to be here.
And this has been a very anticipated segment, I have to say. Our whole concept with Vines Unknown was basically, we're always learning about the same regions over and over through time, obviously. But there's so many other areas around the world that need to be discovered that produce wine in a way that I think needs credibility, needs a forum, needs a voice. And I met the team from Storica not too long ago, maybe about 6 months ago, and I was taken away from the quality, the story, and the history. And as Greeks, we tend to be very proud of who we are, and we thought for a long time that Greece has such a long history of winemaking. But I think Armenia has an even longer recorded history of winemaking, for that matter. So I think this is going to be an interesting, fun segment. We're going to talk a little bit about Armenia's wine culture. We're going to talk a little bit about the creation of Storica wines, and we're going to taste some of the Armenian wines that you represent together here on this segment.
Sounds great.
Excellent. And we also want to thank all the guests that are joining us this evening on a Thursday night to participate and listen. And hopefully, this experience will give you a little more about Armenian wines than before. And Ari is going to basically also let us know at some point. We're going to let our guests ask questions through the last segment of our presentation here.
Yep, I typed it into the chat, but now since I'm speaking, anybody who has any questions, please feel free to type it into the chat. We're going to get to it a little bit later on in the segment. And yeah, and anytime a question comes to you, just type it right in and we'll get to all of them.
Excellent. So, Ara, let's kind of kick off with give us a little bit about what our audience can know about Armenia's wine culture to begin with.
Okay, so the thing that's fascinating about Armenia and the general part of the world where Armenia is that most ampelographers, and these ampelographers are people who study grapevines and the history of grapevines, how grapevines grow, and what species of grapevines are related to which ones, etc. They all seem to agree that the domestication of the grapevine happened essentially where Armenia is today and slightly more to the west and to the north of it. So there's this triangle somewhere between today's Republic of Georgia, today's Republic of Armenia, and what is today sort of far eastern and northern Turkey. That triangle is the real home of where the domestication of the grapevine happens. So forget about wine in general,
Right.
just grapevines, even grapes that you eat, come from this part of the world. It's on a lot of the sort of historical archaeology, a lot of, if you see ruined temples, and if you see ancient manuscripts, most of them are adorned by grapevines at the bottom, on the top, on the sides. So it's really part and parcel of the old rituals of this part of the world. And eventually, obviously, people figured out that grapevines not only give you grapes that are delicious, but they also make you feel happy if they ferment.
Ah,
So, so the first sort of rudiments of winemaking are also thought to originate from this part of the world. which is very fascinating. And interestingly enough, it's only in the past 20 or 30 years that scientists are sort of unearthing caves and remnants of very, very ancient winemaking centers. The oldest one currently that they found is actually in the Republic of Armenia, in the region which some of the wines we'll be tasting comes from. So I'll make a note of that.
Excellent.
So it's a really fascinating place to begin with as when it comes to grapes.
Can you give us a timeline? How many years are we talking about?
Of making wine. So the winery itself, that's considered to be the oldest winery in the world to have been explored, is approximately 6,200 years ago.
Oh my
6,200.
God! Wow,
200 years old. Yeah. So 4,000 BC.
that's amazing.
We're talking before the world as we knew it. So this is really, really long time ago.
Has there been any type of studies of trying to do any genetic testings on different grapes that have originated from Armenia that have kind of overlapped into other wine producing regions? Are there any grapes that have kind of transpired to something else as a hybrid somewhere else?
Right. So that kind of work is just beginning because,
Okay.
as you know, DNA as a science is just so recent. So what they can do is they can relate grapes 1 or 2 generations, but not beyond that quite often. So when it comes to Armenian grape, Mr. Vuillamos, who's the world's leading sort of authority in DNA analysis of grapes,
Right.
he's a Spanish fellow. He has started a project to do that, but apparently it takes a very long time. So it hasn't yet been established whether some of these ancient varieties in Armenia are in fact the forefathers of, say, Pinot Noir or whatever it may be. But it could very well be one day we'll find out that some grape we think is Greek or French may have, yes, French, yes. Sorry
Right.
for all my French friends.
Uh,
May have originated in that part of the world, yes, but there's nothing definitive yet. But what they have clarified is that some of the grape varieties that currently grow in Armenia were actually vinified in that cave we're talking about. So some of the remnants of grapes that they found, they've
Yep.
done DNA analysis on and shown that this is essentially the same as the grapes that are growing there. So what we have is continuity, but what we don't have is how those original grapes relate to grapes in the rest of the world.
I
But what
see.
everyone does agree on is that the grapevine itself, regardless of wine, moved to Europe and moved to the Middle East from this part of the world.
Okay.
So
Incredible.
one way or another, they're all the ancestors are there.
Got it. How about can you tell us what makes Armenia an ideal area for grape growing? What is it about the climate, the soil? Can you just give us a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. And while I'm doing that, maybe I'll turn on my little thing here, my little presentation, just so you know, less words and more pictures is always more helpful, I think. Okay, so but I haven't shared my screen yet. Give me 1 second. I will
I'll have a sip while you're doing.
one participant can share at a time. So is someone else sharing a screen? Not sure. Here it is. Okay. All right, so can we all see that?
Yep.
Because I can't. All right. Here we go. Okay, so that's visible, right?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So your question is, what makes Armenia a sort of ideal place? Well, to be honest, I don't know if it's any more ideal than any other place, but what it is it's a special place and a unique sort of combination of soil, climate, and grape variety. So when we look at this, the first thing you see is, can you see my cursor? I'm not sure. Can
Yes,
you see my mouse?
we
Yeah.
can.
So the region here that's sort of greenish or light
Yeah.
green is the lowest elevation in Armenia. That is the flattest and lowest elevation.
Like the valley?
Yeah, that's the lowest valley there is and the flattest region. That is approximately 500 meters above sea level, right? So keep
Okay.
that in mind. You mentioned I was doing another presentation before I got on here, right?
Yeah.
That was about Piedmont in Italy. And this is the wine that people were talking about. It's a Spana, it's a Nebbiolo, right? It has nothing to do with Armenia, I'm making a point. So you know what the big deal about this wine is? Oh, that it comes from really high elevation of 400 meters.
It's
Right.
the Italian way of marketing.
It's the Italian way of marketing. That's right. Oh, this wine has such profound flavor because it comes from the foothills of the Alps, all the way up there at 400 meters. In Armenia, the lowest elevation is 500, right? Not that this is a competition, and high elevation doesn't necessarily mean better wine or better grapes.
But if it was,
But
you won.
if it was, we definitely win. Yes, you're right. Yeah. But the point is, one of the characteristics of Armenia is high elevation viticulture. And what that really means is lots and lots of sunshine because you're so high up
Yeah.
that even if you get a little rain, a little bit of clouds, some of the clouds are underneath you when you're picking grapes. They're not above
Wow.
you, right? You're above the cloud line. You hear a lot of talk about being above the cloud line when you talk about the sort of mountainous regions of Napa Valley, Howell Mountain, Veeder Mountain. These are all at 700 meters, and they're considered high elevation, right? In Armenia, the lowest elevation flatland, where we consider sort of cheaper wines to come from, is about that elevation. So everything from there on goes up. The brown bits are the highest elevation. That's a mountain right there. And this is a mountain, and this is Vayotsor, the region that we're going to talk about mostly. So high elevation is one of the things. If you look at the map on the right and match it to the elevations, you see these regions, Arakatsotin and Armavir. To the west of the capital Yerevan, to the south is the Arat Valley, which is sort of the flat land, as you can see in the green. Vayotsor is the sort of quality and smaller production winemaking center of Armenia, where we're in really, really high elevation. Here we're above 1,000 meters above sea level. So you get very, very cold nights and you get super hot days. And so you get lots of sunshine to drive alcohol development, right? You get lots of heat to develop sort of ripeness in terms of flavor and tannin. And you get very cold nights, which keeps the grapes very fresh and retains the acidity and doesn't allow the grapes to keep ripening overnight. So the grapes throughout the day are ripening, then at night they stop, then they start again the next day, and then they stop at night. So this gives them a lot of freshness. I'm sure you've had mountain wines from northern Greece,
Yes,
which aren't quite this high up, but you probably sense that sort of freshness in those wines also.
definitely. That's a very good
That's one thing, is the elevation. The other thing are the grape varieties themselves, which are pretty ancient and have been planted there for hundreds, some thousands of years, and the soil. So most of Armenia has volcanic soil. Some of it's interspersed with clay and limestone, and that combination of the three gives you ripeness, sort of full-bodied wines, but it also gives you clarity of flavor from the limestone. And you get a lot of minerality and sort of brightness from the volcanic soils.
So is
Yeah.
there an active volcano in Armenia?
I don't think it's active. No. Aragats is, I think they're all sort of, they've done their bits and they've spewed their lava and they're done.
I got
I mean, I don't know if volcanoes can come back to life a million years later. I don't know. I don't think they do, right?
Anything's possible in the times we live in.
Right. So
2020, yes.
yeah, maybe some other time we'll see if they were.
Interesting.
So anyway, we kind of went through this, and the thing to remember is sort of Noah in the yard, right? When Noah, and then he went down into the valley and planted. So he couldn't have gone to the other side of the mountain because that's not where the grapevine's sort of ancestral roots are, according to ampelographers. We know he came to the eastern side, if he ever existed, if we believe the story, and that would have happened here in these fields where you're seeing this picture on the right. So it's part of the sort of mythology and the ritual of living in this part of the globe to believe that, we live under the mountain where Noah landed, and we live in the area where he first planted grapevines. So it's really ingrained in the rituals. According to history, the Babylonians bought wine from ancient Armenians that were put in wooden barrels and shipped down the river. And Herodotus, one of the major historians of Greece, I'm sure you learned those classes in school, unless you skipped
I
class.
wasn't paying attention.
Might have done. He has made lots of mention of the wines of Armenia along with the horses of Armenia. Actually, Greeks used to buy horses for military use, apparently, from Armenians.
Oh wow.
And when he was there, he wrote quite a bit about Armenian wines and winemaking. I said
Interesting.
Strabo, by the way. How do you say Strabo in Greek?
Honestly, that's the first time I've seen
Yeah,
a
I've never heard this name. And
I think
if you pronounce the B in the correct Greek, it would be Stravo, but Stravo means
means crooked.
crooked. So I don't know if that's true or not.
it means
Could be
what? I don't understand.
Strabo.
Crooked.
Yeah, Strabo, that's the anglicized version of the name. You should look that up. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what the full Greek name is, but he's a fairly well-known historian. Anyway, so this is the 6,100-year-old cave that I was showing you.
Wow.
You know, this is the sort of the entrance there. And this is the inside where there are sort of these pots and these holes. What they found is a press to press grapes
My God.
from way back then. Yeah. And they've done analyses which show the way you prove that whatever resulting sort of fragments of fruit are grapes is you identify tartaric acid, which is unique to grapes. So they found remnants of tartaric acid, which is how archaeologists sort of prove that these were grapes and not pumpkins that they were crushing.
Yeah. Wow.
And
That's
there's
amazing.
sort of, there's sort of, you can see here on the top left, another view of those. And in these other pictures, I'm just showing you historically, this is the karas, the equivalent of the qvevri that the Georgians use.
Yes.
Mhm.
These kind of clay devices are also found in Sicily and other parts of Southern Europe. But in the Armenian tradition, they're sort of half Georgian and half European in that they're half buried in the ground. They're not entirely underground and they're not entirely above ground. 2/3 of them are buried into the ground and 1/3 is left above ground.
Interesting.
This is Garmirpolur, which is just southeast of the capital of Yerevan, where they found approximately 400 of these. And they have cuneiform inscriptions on them stating the dates of the harvest, how many sort of grapes were harvested that year, each year, and how much wine and how many karasses they filled. So there was documentation to show that this was an organized sort of attempt to make wine on a commercial scale, bottle it, document it in cuneiform by taking a rock and really sort of
That's
crazy stuff.
absolutely amazing.
Crazy stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can go visit that. And
Is,
the amazing thing is there's no gate. You can just walk in there. Yeah. Free admission. Yeah.
What
has
were you
anyone
saying,
ever
Loki?
attempted to, has anyone ever attempted to like steal any of these like precious
Funny you
historical?
asked that. So the next picture will probably show you an attempt at stealing one of them.
Oh, there you go.
That's
Great
Fati's
question.
grandfather.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we did not rehearse that, people. He asked the question and the next slide happened to show it. So this is a guy trying to steal a karas, right? I have no idea where this guy's going, but I just wanted to show how how these traditions still keep going. I mean, this is really, really heavy. I feel really bad for the animal that's holding that.
The donkey. My God. Wow. That's
But yeah, but over the past 50, 60 years, there's been an attempt to sort of salvage some of these. A lot of them are in people's homes and yards where they've been there for 100 years, 200 years, 500 years.
wow.
And they're of no use to the people who live there at this point, obviously. So there are some adventurous winemakers who are trying to buy them. They take them off people's hands, put them on a donkey, and also to study how it's put together, what kind of clay it's made with, and what the diameter is, and what the angles are to see if there's a method to the madness.
Wow.
That's interesting.
That's fascinating.
Right. So a very quick glimpse of the various regions. So Arakatsoten here, Arakat is a mountain. It's also an old volcanic mountain. And this region is basically sort of the lower parts of the mountain is where the steps that descend from the mountain is where viticulture is done. So on the left here, you're seeing a winery. In the center, you're seeing this plain, the flatter 500-meter elevation that I was showing you. So this is more commercial winemaking. And this is where, obviously, Armenia was a Soviet republic for about 100 years. And during those years, this western valley floor is where most viticulture took place, because Soviets wanted a lot of wine. They didn't want the best wine. They wanted cheap wine, and they wanted some grapes for brandy also. So they chose the area that was the flattest and the most amenable to sort of commercial viticulture without paying much attention to quality. So as you can see, it's really flat, really widespread. This could be, I don't know, this could be California, this could be Argentina when you look at it, right?
Yeah.
No, there are no slopes, no hills, no elevation, nothing. So this is where a lot of the larger, more commercial wineries grow their grapes because they can mechanize it, they can use tractors and that sort of thing. But traditionally, this is where the cheaper grapes come from that go into distillation into brandy. And on the right, you see Vajot, which is today's sort of leading high quality region. This is not flat by any means. It's high elevation, and it's where the current lineup of Storica wines that we're going to taste today come from. Is on the right.
Cool.
So anyway, this is a basic summary. Grapevines are grown between the elevations of 600 and 1800 meters above sea level, which is really, really high. As I mentioned before, that gives you, to answer your question, Foti, what is special about it? It's the sunlight, the variation between the high of the day and the low of the night, and the sort of extreme climate. So when you're that high up at 1600, any minute you could have a hailstorm, or any minute could be sunburn on the grapes, right?
Right.
So it's really extreme, and you really have to be careful with your grapes. Obviously, you can't mechanize anything. There are no tractors up there. Sometimes there are no roads in these vineyards.
Wow.
You have to get up there, take the bucket, and walk down to where the
So-
road is, put it on the car.
Can I on that comment, can I ask a question then? Having said all this, does that mean that there's quite a bit of organic farming because of these methods?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say certified organic necessarily, but for the
Okay.
most part, it is because there's no mildew. Armenia is not a humid place; it's very dry.
Right.
Primary reason people spray sort of fungicides and other things is obviously due to humidity. Armenia, for the most part, does not have that problem. There are some regions in the far east and the
So-
far northeast which are humid, but for the most part, yes, it's natural, but it's not certified.
Very minimal intervention in the farming practices.
Pretty much minimal intervention. They do a little bit of irrigation
Okay.
because they get so much sun, but this is not the kind of drip irrigation you see in Europe where it's really controlled. They just flood it. So once per
Oh, wow.
season, they're allowed to flood irrigate, and that's it.
So we can basically say clean wines because of what we're just discussing.
Yes, very clean wines, exactly. It's nature making the grapes, really.
That's very important.
That's so great. I love that. I love
Yeah.
learning about this.
Yeah, so this is why you get, what I highlighted in yellow is that the typical characters in the quality wines of Armenia have really truly expressive aromatics that comes from the combination of the cold nights and the super heat of the sun. And when you're there, I hope you guys will come with me next time.
Oh,
Once
yes.
this
I've
coronavirus is done.
already accepted your invitation.
Forget grapes. If you're walking out there in the summer and you're at 1200 elevation, you have to wear a Mexican hat. Otherwise, you can't stay out there for more than 3 or 4 hours at
Wow.
that elevation. The sun is just so intense,
Wow.
right? This is not the Greek sun by the ocean, which is relaxing.
Yeah.
This is a sort of, it bothers you after a while, the
I
sunlight.
see,
Yeah.
I see.
Okay, so
Incredible.
much for the
Yeah,
presentation itself. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
absolutely. It gives a better perspective on, considering what you just mentioned, then yes, like Armenia has an ideal environment for growing grapes at a level that can produce, in turn, high quality wines, as the way I look at it. And not
Exactly.
often today, and this is why we're having this segment, is that when you think of Armenia, not everyone's first thought is wine. But now there's every reason to think about wine when it comes to Armenia based on what you're just presenting to us.
Right. What's interesting is that even though the sort of the setting is perfect and the history's there,
Yes.
what has happened is due to sort of a lot of history, as well as the Soviet years, what happened was a lot of the vineyards are interspersed with different varieties. So if you're a winemaker and you're trying to make a wine with grape variety X, you're going to have a really hard time finding a single grape grower who can assure you that all the grapes he has is grape X, right? Because during the Soviet years, they just said, plant it all together. We're just going to harvest it early and make brandy out of it, right? The Soviets had decided that Armenia would become the brandy factory of the Soviet Union and that Georgia would become the wine factory of the Soviet Union. So it was a controlled economy. Yeah, that's why a lot of the grapes are planted in the wrong places, in the wrong soil, in the wrong aspect, in the wrong topography. So over the past 15, 20 years, there's been a renaissance in that people are rethinking which grape varieties belong where and what the original varieties were and how to grow grapes for wine as opposed to for brandy, right? So that's the process that Armenia is going through now. It's made a lot of, still almost 85% of all the wine grapes grown in Armenia end up in a distillate and end up in brandy. 15 years ago, that number was 95%. So it's gone down by 10%, but it's still only 15% of the grapes that are grown for wine are actually sold as wine. 85% are made into wine and then they're distilled into brandy. Yeah.
I have to say, make a quick comment, and again, I'm not trying to keep referencing that we're Greek, but as Greeks, we have our
I'm sorry, where are you from?
is that, we've drank
where the word narcissism originated.
we grew up with a ton of brandy, as growing up in our household, Metaxa being a big brand and brandy being a part. But I have to say, when I got introduced to Armenian brandy, I was like, wow, this is much better. And I'm not gonna downplay the brandy that comes from Greece, but the best brandy that I've ever had outside of Greece and even from France has been from Armenia.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm not. Yeah, exactly. The brandy's nice. There's plenty of cheap brandy in Armenia too.
Right.
But you probably had the nice stuff. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with growing brandy. It's just that slowly the culture is moving away from brandy into wines. It'll take decades. Yeah.
That's going to lead me into my next question as we go into our next segment in the show here, is that now you mentioned the Renaissance, right? And here is a company that I just founded by mutual friends. I'm going to say accidental, but maybe it was destined to be. So Storica Wines, which I would like you to talk about a little about what is Storica Wines and why now? Why are we now putting together this team to start importing Armenian wine?
Right. Good question. So Storica is an adjective in Italian, right? It's a feminine adjective, means historical or historic, I guess. Storico would be the masculine form. I was not involved in coming up with the name. I don't actually know who came up with the name. Maybe I can find out tomorrow, or maybe someone can tell us in the chat box who came up with the name. But the name kind of says it. There's a story to be told there. And Storica's mission is really to once and for all tell that story the proper way and to ensure that the story is not only told, but that the story lives on to be tomorrow's story also, right? So the sad thing about the wine culture of Armenia is that due to past history and Soviet history, a lot of the winemaking knowledge was lost. And along with it, the wine drinking sort of culture was lost and people drank brandy and vodka. So Storica is now because over the past 10, 12 years, we feel like there are enough high quality wines that are expressive and true to place and that definitely have a place in the US market. So, which is why we think now is the time to import them, but also introduce them and sell them to everyone. Those people who come across it, the interesting thing is a lot of people say, this wine tastes very familiar and that it's unique. And that's the thing about Armenian wines, because there's a question in the comment box, which we'll address together, I'm sure, Poti, later, which is saying, how do you compare Armenian wines to Georgian wines, right? That's a big topic there. And we'll get to it in the last segment. But I'll use that question also to answer this question, in that unlike Georgian wines, Armenia has a chance to press the reset button. And it's been pressing that reset button for about 15 years now. So what Armenia has is a combination of very old grape varieties and an old set of vines. So some of the vines that the grapes are grown on that go into these wines are over 100 years old, right? If you do that in Spain or France, that bottle of wine will cost you $80 if you have 100-year-old vines, right? In Armenia, a 100-year-old vine will create beautiful grapes, and the wine will cost you $30 or $20 or whatever.
I'll take
So
the
there's
Armenian
great
one.
value to be had.
Yeah.
There's a great ratio of value to quality. But also, unlike Georgia, we're not encumbered by tradition, right? Georgia is kind of ties its own hands because it has so many winemaking traditions that it can't break out of its habit. Armenia has an opportunity because of this recent renaissance to sort of reset things. So they're making wines using primarily European equipment. You know, they take care of fermentation temperatures. They make sure that things are filtered properly. And they're not afraid to experiment with new styles because they lost their original ways of winemaking due to history anyway.
Right.
Whereas Georgians are sort of, they have that albatross on their shoulder saying, well, my grandfather made wine this way, so I have to make wine this way. So that's why, to answer your question, this is the perfect time for a company like Storica to import these wines into the States because the quality is just ramping up. And all indications are that in 5 years, that 85% of grapes going into wine will become 75 or 60, hopefully. So there's going to be a lot more of it. We're helping create a market for it in the States so that when the higher quality wines keep coming in larger volumes, there's going to be a channel to sell them to. Otherwise, what's the point, right?
Yeah.
Right. So now that leads me to my next question, which that's very fascinating about the timing of everything. So Storica wine, the company gets created, and then you decide on this winery called Zulal. And why, out of all the wineries, do we start with Zulal?
Why do we start with Zulal?
Yes.
Yeah,
And we can talk a little about the winery and then start tasting wines at some point very soon.
absolutely. Yes, let's start tasting the wines. So Zulal means pure in the Armenian language, right? Zulal. And one of the reasons we started with it was because their aim is to showcase the flavors, textures, and aromas of the sort of leading authentic grape varieties of Armenia. They're not making wines using Malbec or Syrah or international grape varieties. Their aim is to showcase Arani, Voskehat, Chilar, and other sort of autochthonous indigenous grape varieties. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that they're doing so with sort of Western winemaking techniques, which make the wines sort of accessible to Western drinkers, whether they're European or American, right? In that these are not super earthy, kind of slightly dirty tasting wines that are made in a village somewhere that aren't properly filtered or whatever, right? They're really made to a high standard. The third reason is they can make enough volume. It's amazing to make wines that are expressive at that high volume. It's not an easy task. So that's why this is our first line of wines. And hopefully we'll be sort of uh, releasing many other lines of wines in the coming years. This is just the beginning.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Uh, Excellent answers. I just wanted to kind of pick your brain for the audience. And we have a nice lineup that maybe I think this would be the time to taste through the lineup that we have for our guests this evening. Even though we did mention that we're going to taste through the Zulal line, but we also are going to kick off with a sparkler, which, sparkling wines is a growing category lately. And a lot of folks have been exploring proseccos and cavas and different types of sparklers from around the world. But I was so pleased to see that not only is the Storica Wines importing a sparkling wine, but it's, in my opinion, delicious compared to other sparklers that I've worked with in the industry. So let's start with a sparkler.
Okay.
And the proper pronunciation is Kush.
Well, I think it depends who you ask. So some people say kush, some people say kush. I think you should say it the way you want to say it.
Okay.
It's not a word that's common. It's someone's last name, and it would be kush, as in almost in French, kush.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I'm a big fan of sparkling wines, so this is right up my alley. And Ara, I've been drinking sparkling wines for quite some time, but lately, in the last handful of years, it's become more and more of a thing for us. And I start to introduce it to more of my family and friends, and now they're onto this. Where before, it wasn't really considered a selection, other than just toasting and celebrating.
Right. Yeah. Sparkling wine has a sort of an unfortunate situation in the marketplace because a lot of the marketing is driven by sort of celebration only.
In nightclubs,
So a lot of people think, well, there's no birthday, so I'm not going to drink a sparkling wine. I'm like you. I drink sparkling wine all the time,
right?
of various kinds.
I
I
was
think
always
sparkling
kind of
wine, yeah.
shy to drink sparkling wines when I went out, and I give credit to my sister because every time we'd go somewhere, she'd order a sparkling wine, and I was like, "Wow, must be interesting." But like,
So,
she always
so
did
you
it, so
felt
then I started doing it, and then I would, you know, go out for a drink with Foti, and he would do it, and I was like, "Hey, if my sister and Foti are doing it, then I'm good to do it
so,
too."
so you weren't comfortable doing it on your own, is what you're
I
saying.
wasn't. Because
Well, you're a
I'm not
trendsetter,
very
is what
I
you are.
wasn't very well versed at that point.
Why was it the
I
shape of
didn't
the
know much
glass that
about.
threw you off?
I was a sheep, and I just did what other people did.
Got it. Okay.
Oh no.
So, Ara, as you were saying,
Fine. Yeah, so this sparkling wine is made in the sort of method traditionnel, as they call it, or the champagne method, as it used to be called. Now it's illegal to say that,
oh,
but there I said champagne method. Okay,
yes,
so we might get sued tomorrow.
no,
Just kidding.
you know,
Um,
feel
anyway,
free
the
to speak.
champagne method simply means that the second fermentation that produces the bubbles, it actually happens in the bottle that you're buying at the store, right? It's
Mhm.
washed, cleaned, labeled, and then you buy it. The wine never leaves the bottle, unlike Prosecco, where after you make wine, you pour it into a big tank, you close the tank, you pressurize it, and then you produce the bubbles, and then you rebottle it. So this is the traditional method, meaning once you make a still wine, you add further yeast and sugar, you close the cap, and then the bubbles appear inside the very bottle that you buy at the store, which is why it's often slightly more expensive than Prosecco. So this is the first one in Armenia to use autochthonous or indigenous grape varieties. There are other sparklers that come from Armenia, but they use international grape varieties like Chardonnay and other things, which is obviously common in Champagne. But this one uses two grapes, Khatuni and Voskehat, Voskehat being the wine we're going to taste in the Zulal line of wines
Mhm.
that come from the far sort of southwestern corner of Armenia on that thin strip where it goes towards Iran. These are again high elevation. They come from about 1,700 meters above sea level, which is what helps give it that sort of crispness and high level of acidity because it's very cold at night. So these grapes are sort of picked a little early, so they're barely ripe to give them that zing and that citrus and green apple flavor along with the high level of acidity. Then they do a second fermentation in the bottle, after which it sits on the yeast sediment for somewhere between a year and a half to 2 years, right?
Oh wow.
So in Champagne, just to put this in context, a regular non-vintage champagne, which is about 95% of champagnes out there, by law only needs to spend 15 months on the yeast. So this wine spends between 18 and 22 months on the yeast. So it's slightly more complex than your average non-vintage champagne in its yeastiness, uh, but it's not super, super yeasty. So it plays that fine line between having crisp, fresh flavors of fruit along with a yeasty, creamy flavor that comes from the yeast content.
I see.
Just outstanding the way they were able to create that balance. Very, very
Very,
skillful. Very
yep,
skillful.
very balanced wine, and the last bit of sugar that they always put into sparkling wines is perfectly balanced to uh, counterbalance the level of acidity. It's very well made, very well made, and for the price,
I was just
20
gonna.
$23, it's really really nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is typical of what we're talking about the Armenian wine renaissance. Very old variety, very old vineyard, very new method. This is a French method,
Yeah.
right?
I have to
But
say,
yeah,
packaging too is also. I'm very impressed with packaging.
yes, yes, very
Very
attractive
clean,
packaging.
very clean, very pronounced.
Yes. So this is great with fried foods, with sort of um, smoked salmon type of salty,
Yeah,
briny
I was gonna say salty, briny. Being
mussels. Yeah,
being in New England, raw bar, oysters, ceviche, definitely anything that's got that dryness to it, salty, dry food. Um, but just sipping on its own, to really kick things off for any type of an experience, really, I think gets us going.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. So yeah, for those that are listening to us this evening, and for those that are going to be listening to this segment moving forward, um, if you're gonna spend the money for a sparkler, this particular sparkler in the $20 range, hands down, in my opinion, can compare to any sparkling wine that's in the $50 range and above. In my opinion, I would definitely challenge anyone to actually taste with us when it comes to that.
Challenge accepted. Let's see.
So we now will move into the Zulal wines.
Okay, so as I said, Zulal is a project that aims to make wines from Armenia's leading indigenous grape varieties. And the overwhelming majority of the wines will not undergo sort of oak aging or anything like that in order to preserve the flavors, aromas, and textures of the grapes themselves. There it is, yes. So you can see it has a nice label with some nice scripts. Um, the first wine, the white wine we're having, is made with a grape called Foskehat. It's the leading white grape variety of Armenia. Uh, the word actually Voski is gold. Hat is for Hadik. Hadik means berry, so it means golden berry, because you know, the berries are golden. Basically, the grape berries, they have a nice
Yeah.
golden color.
So the skin color is golden.
Yes.
Okay.
Um, so this is also a very old variety, and it's an interesting variety in the sense that when people here taste it, when I have it, people taste it, they have a similar reaction to what we were saying earlier, which is it's so familiar, and yet I don't think I've had this before, but I think I've had it, but I think I've never had this before. They whiffle waffle because the body of the wine is rich like a Chardonnay or a Chenin Blanc,
Mhm.
um, but the flavors aren't anything like a Chardonnay. And the acidity carries the weight of the wine. So it's a relatively weighty white wine, not super weighty like a Viognier, but a medium to medium plus weight. And
Mhm.
it has a very nice sort of herbal note
Yeah,
over it, sort of like chamomile tea or
Mm.
something like that.
I can
This
definitely
vintage,
sense
yeah,
the herbaceousness.
something herbal, right? Maybe
Yeah.
some Greek mountain herbs. That's what we're smelling.
Greek mountain tea, is that what you said?
Yeah, exactly. You know the Greek mountain tea they sell in the store in a sort of
Mm.
plastic wrapping with the
Yeah,
long
yeah, yeah.
leaves. That's kind of what this reminds me of. What is that called in Greek? I don't know.
So depending on where you come in from Greece, everyone has their own local term for it.
I see.
Yeah.
Good for
And
them.
so, no, not
So
really,
none of
because
them know what they're talking,
no,
what the
we're
next
always
person is
fighting. We're
talking
always
about.
fighting like what is the right term.
That's fine. All right, so let's not fight about that. But it does have an herbal tea
But
sort of.
definitely, yeah, I can definitely sense the that herbal essence on the aromas for
And on
sure.
the palate, you'll taste more less of the herbal and more of the sort of stone fruits, the pear, the very ripe
Yeah.
apple. And in
Right.
the
Yeah.
warmer vintages, like the next vintage we'll carry, it'll have more of a sort of peach and even honeysuckle type of aroma to it.
Mm.
What gets me is the finish.
Mhm.
That's where I mean, the aroma's great, the textures and flavors great, but what keeps me back to sipping it is the finish.
Wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it the flavors on the finish?
Flavors, how it lingers, and how it just keeps
Yeah,
my palate still active. It doesn't fall flat. It doesn't like go away quickly like some whites can tend to do. It just
exactly.
stays with
And
me.
well, that's one of the classic traits of quality, right? Is sort of the finish that doesn't fall off. A lot of
Right.
cheap wines you buy, they might taste good on the mid palate, but as soon as you swallow it, it's gone.
Mm.
Yeah. I
This
think
one does linger. Yeah.
as drinkers or just in general, I think we're not really paying attention because we're in conversation, we're eating, uh, but I truly believe that the finish is probably just as important as anything because it's what keeps us sipping it more and more.
That's right. Right. Absolutely.
But yeah,
It's like a memory, right? It's
Hmm.
like you watch a powerful movie, and
yes,
the 2 minutes after the movie sometimes are more important than the movie itself,
itself.
right?
Ah,
Because you think
I like
about
that
what just happened.
analogy.
Yeah. So wine is like that too sometimes. Yeah. It lingers
mm,
with.
excellent. Ari, any thoughts? I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, I'm soaking this all in. I'm not well versed with Armenian wines, and I invited several of my Armenian friends to the webinar tonight, and they were like, "Wait, is it a brandy webinar?" And I'm like, "No, no, no, wine, wine, wine." So this is incredible and fascinating, and I think everybody who's on here is going to get a lot out of it. I'm getting a lot out of it. I mean, I had no idea, and I'm kind of a history buff, and just the history of it is just absolutely amazing. I had no idea, and thank you so much for like opening our eyes to
oh,
this, and for
Absolutely.
Storica as a whole to bring this to us.
Absolutely. And we'll be bringing more soon enough, I hope.
love it,
To
love
answer
it.
the question in the box, the Zulal Voske does not have oak, but it does feel rich enough that it may have been an oak, but as far as we know, it's never been inside of an oak barrel. Mm.
I was just gonna ask, Ara, have
Yeah.
you had a Voskat that's been aged in barrels?
Yes, I've tried a couple. Uh-huh.
And your
And
thoughts?
we might have some on the market next year. We'll see.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
The tricky thing with the wines there is so oak barrels aren't really traditional in that part of the world in the
Okay.
Hmm.
sense of like history.
True.
It's a European import. And so they're trying to figure out whether to use the local wood or to import wood from
Gotcha.
Slovenia or
Okay.
France and that sort of thing. The local wood sometimes is too powerful. So I
Mm,
think it'll be another 5 years before most wineries figure out what kind of barrel to use on each grape variety.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's really
Possibly.
the clay. Yeah, it's really the amphora that's the traditional
Yeah.
maturation
Yeah.
vessel.
True. Well, this is I can drink this all night.
You know why they don't do it in clay anymore? Because they
Why?
don't have donkeys to move it around, right? Picture, remember the picture?
Well, we should start a business in Armenia that actually
That's right.
sells donkeys.
Right. Oh, you have enough of them
Oh,
in Greece, right? You
Oh
can just
yeah.
like
no, no, no. The
ship them
donkeys in
from
Greece are too
Greece.
lazy.
They,
No, that's not gonna work. But so now that we've got to experience the white, which I think is a fascinating selection for anybody who hasn't had it to try it for sure. White wine lovers and white wine lovers, you should definitely have a chance at this.
Yeah.
But now, what I was also pleased to see that there's a rosé in the lineup, and
yeah,
rosé, which in for us, it's still a growing category. It's been trendy for the last 4 or 5 years. There's still people that are on the fence about rosé and what it really means, but in the European cultures, obviously rosé has been a staple for centuries. How Let's talk about rosé real quickly in Armenia, and is it viewed the same way as in the rest of Europe before we get to try this delicious selection from Zulal. But your thoughts on rosé?
yeah. Rosé is also a fairly new phenomenon.
Okay.
It wasn't traditionally done because traditionally you wouldn't have enough time to bury it and then remove the skins when the wine is pink. So by the time weeks and months passed, when you go
Right.
back in there to get the grape skins off, it would be
It
deeper
wouldn't work.
anyway.
It
Yeah.
wouldn't work.
So it's not really traditional. It's part of the Renaissance. So
Gotcha.
it's essentially an import. We can admit that.
Okay.
Uh, but the good news is the leading grape variety of Armenia is very sort of conducive to making rosé because its primary quality is bright red, expressive cherry fruit kind
Yeah.
of flavor. That's the Areni grape, which is the grape that this rosé is made with. I don't have the rosé with me, so I'm going to let you guys taste it.
Yeah. I
But you'll notice that it's all about red berry.
I still find I've had rosés from different wine cultures and different methods and different styles and different grape varieties, and it can be so very different from one another. But lately, obviously, I feel that it was still modern in the sense that it was made because, like as you mentioned, fresh aromas, very crisp, very refreshing, but still contains a very good element of fruit. A French rosé.
Right, right. And keep in mind, this is the 2018 you're tasting, so it's 2 years
And
old, and
still,
it's still very expressive.
yes,
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
the point that Ari wants to make, Ari, is that rosés in general have a very short shelf life because of the composition and the way they're made. The skin contact is minimal. It doesn't really extract too much of the compounds that are found. Not to get too geeky and technical, but basically what we're getting at is that rosé should be consumed very fast. You know, they need to be consumed very early. They don't age well, for that matter, for the most part.
For the most
But
part.
you know, being that it's 2 years old, it still feels tastes just as fresh as any 2019 rosé that we've had from other parts of the world.
Oh
But
yeah,
yes, I mean, for those of us that are listening and have enjoyed rosés and are loving rosés or just starting to get into rosés, this would be right up your alley because of what we
yeah,
just mentioned.
yeah. This one really has very zingy, sort of expressive red fruit, but the body is weightier than your typical sort of southern French rosé. So it
Yes,
has enough body to be had with like roasted chicken or a salad with shrimps on it or something like that. So sort
I'll
of,
tell you,
Interesting.
yeah.
Ira, last week I had the Zalal rosé with actually with a with a sirloin.
What?
Right? And it
Yes.
works.
and
Yeah.
it was perfect because all right, so
Wow.
you know, we think this on, not to go off topic real quickly, but you know, we're always thinking you know, reds with, you know, with cuts of different types of meats,
Yeah.
ribeye, New York sirloin, porter, and so on and so on. But you know, if you think about it, you know, a cut of meat which has very little, in my opinion, unless there's a lot of fat, there's very little flavor profile that it really presents. And unless you season it with whatever you're going to season it, or if you're going to put a dry rub on it, you lose the meat or the beef that you're having with a very heavy red wine. When you have it with a rosé, in my opinion, like the Zulal, you still maintain the flavors of the beef that you're having or the cut of beef along with the wine itself. I find that it's a perfect balance. But so many of my friends and family kind of like are a little hesitant, like, you know, why would I waste a good cut of beef with a rosé? But I say,
Hesitant. Yeah, you're blowing my mind right now. I,
you know,
I
Yeah.
never even thought about doing that.
try it and then call me.
I
Yeah.
actually I agree with Foti completely. You know what I like with steak? Riesling.
Riesling.
Wow.
Riesling or barrel-aged Chardonnay. Though I think the only people who say, "Oh, you're having steak, you should have this blockbuster Cabernet," are people who have too much Napa Cabernet to sell you, and
Oh,
that's so. I mean,
yes,
So
it
what's
makes
my
no sense. It
comeback
just
when I
takes over
order?
the flavor of the food. Yeah.
yes.
What's my comeback when I order a rosé or Riesling with the steak and the server looks at me funny? I need a good comeback.
Send them the link to this webinar.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's your comeback.
Exactly. Tell them to call Foti or me, and we'll take
Yeah.
care of it. Don't
Right.
worry.
I
But
need a professional to stand up for me.
I just wanted to mention that because I had it last week and it just floored me, and I was like, I gotta make this announcement during the webinar.
So some nice Greek barbecue with Armenian rosé. That
Wow,
would be
Yes, Greek lamb and Armenian wine.
right.
that's great. I
Yeah,
love that.
excellent. So there we, you know, we have the so quick question: how
Yeah.
long is the skin contact with this rosé? Do you have any idea, or
On this
there's
rosé,
something?
I don't know for a fact, but just based on how it tastes, how it smells,
Yes.
probably a couple of weeks, not more.
Right, because obviously, ladies and gentlemen, you know, rosés are wines typically made from red grapes, and what determines the color and the look is how much time the skins are in contact with the juice that's in the vat when it's fermenting. So the longer they stay in the vat, the darker the juice gets, right? So the less time it has together, the lighter and brighter it looks. Does that
Hold
help
it
you,
right
Ari?
in front of you, Foti.
Well,
There you go. Ah, that looks good.
the sun from Santorini is bothering me with
That
it.
would be a great marketing picture with a picture of Zulal Rosé at
Well,
Santorini.
we're gonna invite so Storica and along with yourself, and we're gonna have to have like trip planned to Santorini. We're gonna bring Armenian wine, and we're gonna do some great things together there.
All right.
Santorini also, by the way, is full of volcanic soil, just like Armenia.
Mhm.
So, you know, they also make great
But
wines.
the only problem there is that it's still considered slightly active. So
Yeah.
Oh, did he freeze?
So if you're on an island with a slightly active volcano, and the only way to get out is by boat, you're in trouble, right?
A little bit, yes.
well, Ara, I got to tell you, now that you just mentioned that, not that this have to do with the webinar, but I happened to be in Greece during a unfortunate circumstance with an earthquake. I was in Athens, and the only way to get out of Athens was I had to jump on the next ferry boat that was leaving, and that was one of my experiences of those circumstances.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's move on to our next one. So we just got to experience the rosé, and we're going to move into what I've been waiting for is the red,
Yes, that's what I've been
which
sipping on.
which is a blend, right, Ara?
It is, yes. So this one's a blend of 70% Areni. That's that sort of indigenous leading red grape of Armenia we were talking about that the rosé is made with. But in this case, they blended it with 20% Syrah and 10% Sireni, which is a grape that comes from Artsakh in the far east of Armenia.
Foti, hold
Interesting
it a
to
little
think.
over yourself.
Yeah.
We can't see. There you go.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
So Adeni, that's the correct pronunciation. Adeni.
Yes, Areni.
Adeni.
So Areni is also the name of the village, which is sort of the winemaking center of that southern high quality region where that old cave is, and a lot of the
Okay.
traditional winemaking is preserved there because the Soviets didn't really bother to go all the way there.
So
Interesting.
So what's interesting about this red wine? Sorry, go ahead.
real quickly, so Adeni is the name of the varietal, but it's also name of the area.
It's a town. It's a small town
So
that is kind of located in the southeast. That last province I showed you for winemaking.
Mhm.
So it's a town that is kind of in the center of all the sort of high quality hillside winemaking that goes on there at the high elevations.
So can Adeni, the varietal, grow outside of the town Adeni?
It does. So there's a nice winery that actually planted Areni in the northwest of Armenia, in that Arakatsotin region. It's a very well-established winery, and their wines sell for a lot of money. So they've proven what a lot of people said couldn't be done. They said, "Oh no, Areni only grows where that Areni region is." This guy proved them wrong, basically. It does need sort of soils that are not compacted, so it can't grow in clay soils and things like that. It needs looser soil.
Okay.
But other than that, they've proven that they can grow it in other parts of Armenia.
Excellent. So let's get into the wine and let's give our audience a little preview of this great red blend.
Okay, so this red blend is interesting because it kind of marries 3 grape varieties and 3 wine regions. So,
Wow.
which is not really commonly done in Armenia, which is why it's unique. So the Areni comes from the southeast, that Vayotsto region that we spoke of. So it'll bring that fresh red berry flavor to the wine. The Syrah comes from those flatter 500-meter elevations. Remember, I was saying those are the lowest elevations in Armenia, the more sort of commercial winemaking. It comes from that region, which makes riper grapes. So the Syrah brings this sense of ripeness, sort of that fig and maybe blackberry jam, blueberry jam kind of aroma you find in this wine. And the Sireni comes from Artsakh, which is in the far east of Armenia, which is a much more moderate and less extreme in climate. It's a little more humid and little warmer. So that grape makes sort of darkly colored, intense, more tannic wine. What this blend is basically indicative of what the 3 different regions and the 3 different grapes of Armenia grown in 3 different regions can do. This is not typical, but it's a very interesting wine because you get the fresh berry from the Areni, you get the Syrah spice and pepperiness and ripeness, and you get the structure of Syreni, that combination of tannin and acid.
Outstanding. Uh,
It's like a blend from all over.
right. So it's like a, is there Armenian like equivalent of Côte d'Aron?
Something like that, yeah, or Vin de France,
Vin
even.
de France. Definitely, again, great aromas from all three varietals combined. They're very inviting for a red, very warm aromas. Especially now that the weather's getting cooler. I think this is such a great fit at the moment. I mean, today was well, I'm in Boston right now, so the weather is still in the 60s, but at night it kind of drops quickly. But this is a great fitting transitional wine because we're still thinking that summer just finished, right? It feels like summer just ended,
Right.
and we're still like
Especially
awaiting the
today.
wrath of the winter. But the aromas are very inviting, Ara, for sure.
Yep.
Uh, and
So the wine is not, yeah, it has a lot of depth of flavors from each of the three grapes, but it still feels light enough. I think that's
yeah,
what you're getting at. It's not a snowstorm wine yet. It's more like a
no.
wine. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if I can put this into my perspective, it's the layers are just flowing. There's different, obviously I can taste the different layers because of what you just mentioned, but they flow. In some other complex wines, you can really distinguish the different layers individually, but here it flows together. So what I mean by texturally, like on your palate, the sensation feels great. It feels smooth. Some
Yes.
wines have different sensations because of the way they're made up, but here the textures really flow.
Yep, I agree with you. I think it's what we would call a sort of round and supple wine. It's not an angular sort of sour food wine. It's
Right.
very
Yeah.
rounded and supple. Yeah.
Yes.
So I can see myself having this on its own and also at the table.
Mhm.
Especially, I'm sure, I mean, it's been open for about half an hour, so it's have some time to kind of soften up, or as we say, breathe. We let our wine breathe. But I'm sure as time goes on, the smoother it gets.
Oh yeah, yeah. It does. Try it tomorrow morning on your cereal.
I
It'll
don't think that's
Yeah.
possible. It'll be gone by tomorrow morning,
be very smooth.
right? Excellent. I mean, this is fascinating that we're actually tasting, in my opinion, world-class wine from Armenia.
At
And
great prices, right? Yeah.
I do believe, Ara, you answered a lot of the questions. There's one more that I don't think we got to. If you could real quickly just get to,
Absolutely.
is it still the case that Armenia has avoided the phylloxera
Phylloxera, yeah.
plagued other wine regions?
Right. So the only regions that phylloxera has shown up in, unfortunately, is the Ararat Valley and Armavir in that western flatter region. There is
Yeah.
some phylloxera there, as well as the northeast. So phylloxera, for those of you unfamiliar with it, is the louse that
Mm.
kind of feeds on the roots of grapevines that essentially destroyed the entire wine industry about 150 years ago.
Wow.
Another great gift from America to Europe. That's how the French look at it. Uh, it did make it all the way to sort of Georgia. Most of Armenia has sandier soils. So it was thought that there was no phylloxera, but unfortunately, in that southwestern corner, they have found phylloxera as well as in Davush up in the northeast. But what they say is that it's sort of contained and that they're dealing with it by regrafting vines. So it hasn't been a huge problem, but it's
Okay.
not completely free of phylloxera anymore.
Mm. Wow.
Also, another question about orange wines in Armenia. So Armenia doesn't really have a tradition of making orange wines. There are some experiments being done, sort of learning from the neighboring Georgians, but it remains very sort of tangential. No one's really making large volumes of orange wine commercially in
Yet.
Armenia yet. Yet.
Yet. Okay. Excellent. Ari, before we get to more of our questions, I just wanted to point out for our audience that's listening, if you've and we're hoping that you have enjoyed this segment and understanding what we're presenting. The wines that we've just featured for you in this segment are available on the Urban Wine Club platform, which is urbanwineclub.co. I think Ari has posted a link to the shopping cart where we feature all of the wines individually for sale and also as a 4-pack, which you can purchase and we actually ship it to you right to your door. So this is a great opportunity for those of you that haven't tried the Zulal wines and the Kush. And if you haven't had a chance to look at your local retailer, if they have it or not, we want to make the process very efficient and easy for you. You can just click on that link, and we'd love for you to at least participate in purchasing the wines and trying them, and also giving us feedback as well after you've had them. So I just want to point that out. Urbanwineclub.co. Ari put the link in the chat box for you, and we also have. And before we sign off, we'll definitely together with you, Ara, is let everyone know about the different social media platforms, the handles, the website for Storica that people can find out more information.
Absolutely, yeah. So Storica_wines on Instagram. Follow us. You'll see great pictures of Armenian vineyards and what new exciting wines we're working on getting over here for you guys. So do follow us because there's going to be a lot of new stuff coming over the next year. It's very exciting because I think consumers here are ready for new things. Everyone's had enough of Italian regions and French regions, and they're always looking for new ideas. And Armenia is a great source for new ideas that are familiar and sort of exotic at the same time.
Right.
Absolutely.
So definitely, like, we have to mention that before we come to the end of our segment. Ari, I have a couple more questions, unless you have any ones that are in the.
No, Ara actually addressed all the questions that were posted in the chat. So if you have any, go ahead, and then I'll give us
so the one question I have that came to me directly that didn't come in the chat box is, does Storica plan on bringing in high quality brandy, even though this is a wine? Sorry, but I guess we have to ask this. Any plans or any projects in the works?
Well, I'll be a politician and say we haven't decided not to do that. So I think if we were to find a nice brandy that kind of tells a story, why not? I don't think there's a reason why we shouldn't do that. Absolutely. We're all about telling the story of this place, and anything made with grapes is up for grabs. So why not, as long as it's good?
Here's a next question. Does Armenia produce distillates?
So yeah, brandy is a distillate.
I'm sorry.
So distillate is anything that you kind of distill after making wine. So brandy, grappa, stuff like that.
Yeah, that was their example. Equivalent to grappa. Is there anything that's coming out of Armenia in that fashion?
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of technically, they're all called brandy. So there's a misnomer. A lot of people think brandy has to be brown, but it doesn't. So, and a lot of people think transparent distillate from grapes is vodka, but it's not. Vodka can only be made from grains, not grapes. So basically what they do is they distill from grapes and apricots and other fruits. They distill it into technically what is brandy. But in this country, we think brandy has to be brown, but it's not. So it would be clear like
that's
water.
Very good point. So brandy can be clear.
Yeah.
Brandy is clear when you make it. You either add color to it artificially or you put it in a wooden barrel. That's when it gets brown. Yeah.
Got it.
Most brandy is made clear.
Yeah. Another question. You had touched on this earlier about consumption. Does Armenia have a relatively high domestic consumption of their wines?
I guess it depends what you mean by relatively high. So it has the newer generation is apparently drinking much more wine than the previous one. There are a lot of cool and hip wine bars popping up all over town.
Oh, nice.
That's kind of the thing to do these days, whereas before they would go eat food and sort of throw back shots of vodka and things like that. So I wouldn't say it's quite as, they probably drink more wine in Italy and Greece than they do in Armenia.
I see.
But the younger generation is drinking wine as their go-to drink. So probably in 10 years, if you ask me that question, if we see one another again in Santorini, I'll have a different answer for you.
Mm,
So it's growing. The segment of consumers in Armenia that are drinking wine is growing, and institutions and sort of bars and restaurants are offering more and more wines. That is true. But compared to, say, European countries or Argentina, it's still pretty low.
got it. This next question, I don't know if you can actually justify this, but we'll ask it
I
anyway.
just ask, like, where are you getting all these questions
They're
from if they're
texting
not
me.
in the chat box?
Yeah.
They're texting you.
Yes. They don't want to be known.
Okay.
If you were to compare one uh, region of the world that produces wine, where would you compare Armenia to?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Hmm.
Who wrote that? That's a tough one. Yeah.
These are smart Alex that are here.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really know how to answer that question. Honestly,
We're not going to answer it.
maybe sort of the cooler regions of Chile by the ocean,
Yeah.
something like that. Maybe Santorini. Why not? I mean, Santorini is much windier.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of a place that's deeply continental and with high elevation. Some of the islands, I would say.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. How about I have a question? What's
Want to
next
text
for
it to me?
yeah? What's next for Storica wines?
What is next for Storica wines? Well, first is to sort of continue our push to open markets in the US because it's it's easy to bring wines to the US. You just kind of make arrangements. Someone puts something on a boat and the stuff shows up.
Right.
So what's next for us is to ensure that there are people here waiting for it, right?
Right.
And who are going to take the stuff. So it's opening up the US market is what's next for us. That'll take another 6 months to a year. After that, in terms of products, in terms of ideas, we are scouting Armenia from the north to the south, the west to the east, whatever that phrase is. And we're going to find really interesting, unique wines at different prices and in different styles to showcase in the US to different levels of consumers. Some primarily for restaurants, others for sort of everyday drinking, others for high-end retail shops. So it's really creating a market here so that we enable the Renaissance to continue and to grow to become a real true Renaissance. Because if we don't do this in 15 years, some of these new wineries that are doing good projects, you know what happens when the guy who's running the winery retires and his son goes to accounting school and moves to France, right? They give up.
Right.
So we don't want that to happen in order to ensure continuity and that this becomes a sort of a stable part of the local economy and that it's an industry that's sort of sustainable. We need to open markets here and develop connections with all the wineries to tell them, if you really focus on quality, we promise to find you a market. So that's really the conversation Storica's kind of having.
Well, that's very inspiring and intriguing for us to stay connected because we always want to see what's next. And definitely keep us in mind when that does happen. We'd love to make sure that we have you back again on our segments to kind of give us the updates. And hopefully on the next segment, we'll feature other wineries that you're bringing into the market. But at this moment,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Ara, on my behalf, I wanted to thank you so much for this this time and opportunity to learn more about the Armenian wine culture, Armenia in general, the wines that we just tasted, your perspectives, everything you just provided for me was very priceless in my sense because I enjoy bringing folks like yourself who actually can present it, articulate it, and actually break it down so that anybody that is listening can understand.
I was gonna say the fact that he's an educator made this all the better. The way he did the presentation, the slideshow, the way
Can we
he
put a
explained.
plug in for Ara, like as an educator? Like, how can we plug that in that you're an educator, Ara?
Well, yeah. So I don't teach at home. I can't take any private private business. I teach. If you want to plug, I teach at Boston University. They have a really interesting wine program that they've developed in house. So unlike most educational,
I don't want to offend you, Ira, but Foti is a BC alum, so
all right,
don't
I'm
hold
gonna
it
hang up.
against
I'm gonna
him.
hang up. Wait.
Don't
Just
hold it
school down the
against him.
street. But But having said that, Ari, you're a BU guy. So what's
That's why we have this this connection, Ara and I. Ara and
I
Ari.
see. I see. Ara and Ari at BU, right? That's the
But yes, I wanted to plug that in because I think it's important to know that those that want to learn more about wine, that there's outlets that you provide. But again, thank you very much, Ara. This was very, very fulfilling for me personally. I hope for our guests, and I hope for Ari, who was also kind of molding his
Oh my God, absolutely.
sharpening his wine skills here on these segments.
This was far more fascinating than I anticipated it would be. And that's true. That's a very true. You know, I always look forward to these. I always look forward to learning, but the history is just absolutely fascinating. I had no idea.
And I want to make sure I don't forget, but I definitely want to, acknowledge. I want to thank the team from Storica Wines, Zach, Kevork, Rachel, Catherine, and Ara yourself. We've been very fortunate to have this collaboration, this partnership, this friendship that we've developed in such a short time, and that we're able to actually be a part of the development of your vision and your passions in the Armenian wine culture.
absolutely. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure for us to have people like you as a partner because we can't do this by ourselves, obviously. So thank you for letting out a hand and being our partner.
No, we appreciate all of it. We appreciate your expertise. We appreciate your team for their professionalism. I want to say thank you so much to everybody who is listening tonight. Tomorrow, this will be a video and it will be a podcast. We'll post all the information. We're going to post all of Storica's information. And I want to thank Foti for being Foti. And Ara, in case you didn't know, he's Greek. I just want to throw that out there.
That makes sense.
I don't know. I don't know if it was clear to you.
Put that in the post.
Thank you so much, Foti. And Ara, absolutely wonderful to have you. Everything you're very well spoken. The educator aspect is so well received because you just made it sound so very nice and simple, and we appreciate that.
No problem. Glad to be here. Thank you,
guys. Everyone. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you soon. Stay tuned. We got more great episodes coming up. Just follow us on urbanwineclub.co and all of our handles on social media.
And download the app, free on the App Store and Google Play.
Take care, everybody. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Ara. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.